Welcome to a Proficient video series covering Power BI. In this segment, we're going to talk about how to enable an OData feed to get data from a Microsoft SQL Server database into Power BI. We're going to cover how to tap into data that might be stored in either a on-premise Microsoft SQL Server database or in the cloud on a Microsoft Azure virtual machine environment. So why would you want to do this? One example use case that might be pretty common is to expose some relational data from a data warehouse via an OData feed. We then want to create a Power Pivot model and a Power View dashboard and host that in Power BI. Lastly, we might want to perform a scheduled data refresh so that our model and dashboard is constantly updated as records in the underlying data warehouse change. Technologically, data is accessed through something called a Data Management Gateway, or DMG. A DMG is installed on each environment hosting SQL Server, so that would be both on-premises environments and Azure Virtual Machine environments. You can optionally install multiple DMGs per environment if you'd like. For example, if you would like your data from different departments to route through different DMGs. Data is then exposed through something called an OData feed, and data is secured through your domain's existing Active Directory. So let's get cracking. The first thing you're going to want to do is log in or remote desktop into whatever environment is hosting your SQL Server database. As a side note, connecting to Office 365 directly from this environment makes a few of the gateway registration steps later on a bit smoother. From there, go ahead and browse to the Office 365 website and log in. Then in the top right corner, select the Admin dropdown and choose Power BI. Then select Add a new gateway and give your gateway a name. Next, you should hopefully see a screen that says your gateway has been successfully created. Down near the bottom, there's something called a gateway key, and you're going to want to copy and paste that into some file that you can save because we'll need that later. The next thing you're going to want to do is install the Data Management Gateway client on your environment hosting your SQL Server database. Before you do the install, make sure you have the required Microsoft .NET Framework 4.5 installed or the recommended 4.5.1 version. Then you can go out on the web and search for Microsoft Data Management Gateway, download the tool, and install it on your SQL Server host. Note that the DMG can only be installed on Windows 7 and 8, as well as Windows Server 2008 R2 and Server 2012. Once the installation is complete, you can now run something called the Data Management Gateway Configuration Manager. The first thing it'll ask for is the gateway key we received from Power BI administration earlier. Next, the tool will ask you which type of security certificate you'd like to use, as well as a secure or non-secure HTTP connection for your OData feed. If you're going with the secure HTTPS route, you'll want to make sure your port 8050 is open in your firewall and 8051 for the HTTP non-secure connection. Once you're done clicking through all the screens, select Register Gateway. At this point in time, you'll want to check in two different places that your gateway is correctly registered. One is in the DMG Configuration Manager. It should say Registered next to Gateway Key Status. The other is to switch over to Office 365, and you should see your gateway listed there with a green check mark that says Running. If you receive any errors or problems, two things I found useful are one, using the Configuration Manager to stop and then restart the service. Additionally, you can regenerate a gateway key back in Power BI and then register that new key. Alright, now that we got our gateway all set up, go back over to Office 365 in the Power BI Administration section and browse over to Data Sources and click Add a new data source. Here you'll want to check Enable Cloud Access and or Enable OData Feed depending on if you want workbooks to be able to refresh and or OData feeds to be able to connect to your data. The next screen will ask you to set some connection information, such as which gateway you want to connect through, what server you want to connect to, and which database you'd like to connect to. Click Set Credentials and enter in either a specific Windows authentication credential set you'd like to connect through, such as a service account, or alternatively, a SQL Server authentication account. The last couple things we want to do is choose which tables and or views we'd like to expose via our data source, and then configure which users or Active Directory groups will have access to use the data source to connect to the underlying data. So that was quite a few steps, but at this point in time we should have our data management gateway up and running, our data source should be configured correctly, and our OData feed should be active. One simple way to find out if your data feed is active and working is to connect through it through Excel. Back in Office 365, go into the data source section, and next to your data source you just set up, click the ellipses, and you'll see OData Feed URL. Then fire up Excel, and in the Data ribbon, choose From Other Sources, and then From OData Data Feed. You'll provide that feed URL we just grabbed from Office 365, and then any required credentials if they are needed. Otherwise, you can use Windows authentication. Here's some links that I found contain useful information for this whole process. As a brief review, we created a gateway in Power BI Administration. We installed and configured a DMG client on our environment hosting SQL Server, and then we created a data source and exposed a data feed. I'd like to thank you for joining me in this overview of exposing data feeds for Power BI.